We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and what about the I word?
The I word?
Engagement. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were technically poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. This week, we are talking the 1993 film Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my mysterious co-host, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
Yes.
Well, as I typically ask at the beginning of these, what's your history with this movie? I'm going to guess you did not see it in theaters. But when did it first come onto your radar? And had you seen it before this week?
Yeah, I'd definitely seen it before this week. I don't think I saw it in theaters, but I remember watching like Batman the Animated Series as a kid. So like I'm a little I feel like I'd remember seeing it, but I didn't think to ask my dad. But so I didn't see it in theaters that I remember, but I was into the show. Like I watched it. I know I watched it as a kid. Like I'd tape it up. My parents would tape it for me off TV if I was going to miss it or something. And I had like an old, back when you recorded things off TV.
Yeah, the Williams tape vault. Yeah, we've talked about this before.
Yeah, but I had tapes that were just Batman the Animated Series episode. So like it was on my radar. So I don't really know why I didn't go and see this, but I obviously know I've watched it because there's whole pieces of this that are just in my brain, like the whole finale at the Gotham World's Fair, ruins and all that. That's all up there. So I know I've seen it before, but I had not gone back to it in some time. Probably need to do like a full dive-in rewatch of Mask of the Phantasm, but
you just did that, Andrew.
Meant Batman the Animated Series. Also, do we know where this fits in with the animated series? Like, is there a place where it belongs that we know of? But well, that's a different question.
It's produced, but right after the first season, between the first season and second season, but there's not any connective threads otherwise, so it really doesn't matter. They get into like a bit of like Joker's origin here that never comes up. In fact, the animated series was half-heartedly in the universe of the 1989 film, but obviously as the series went on and the movies went on, they diverged and didn't really cross-reference at all.
Because Joker's name is Jack Napier in Batman Animated Series.
It is said exactly one time in the animated series, offhand, that he's Jack Napier, but that is clearly not the case in the universe of this movie. But yeah, so it's all very loose. But I do recommend going back and rewatching Batman the Animated Series. I too grew up watching that show and was a huge fan. It was really always like my Batman. I mean, I watched the Burton movies, I watched it all, but I felt like that was the Batman for me as a kid. I specifically remember, watching cartoons as a kid, as you do. And when Batman came on, it was like, all right, this is like serious. Like I got to pay attention. I got to follow this plot. It felt like it was made for an older audience than me, which it wasn't. To be fair, it's made for kids. I feel like sometimes the legend of that show, people get a little carried away. Like they snuck in all this crazy stuff to a kid's show. Like it treats kids with respect and deals with some, at times, heavy themes, but it's a kid's show. I don't want to get too carried away with it. But yeah, I always loved it as a kid. years ago, they released the box set on DVD. I did an entire rewatch at that time. And of course, when they released it on Blu-ray, I bought that and did another entire rewatch. And then I just occasionally watch a few episodes that, are some of my favorites. So absolutely love the series, but I did not know this movie existed. And I was maybe in high school. I mean, I don't remember this movie coming out. I don't remember ads for it. I don't remember seeing it at the the video rental stores. And then it's really in the era of like YouTubers and stuff and, nerd culture kind of creating this whole content machine that I would watch videos about, nostalgic stuff or 90s media. And this movie was talked about a lot, like this great animated film from the animated series creators. And I had to track it down and watch it at that time. So I was definitely, I was high school or shortly after when I finally actually saw this movie.
I had a very similar experience. Like, I don't remember this movie existing as a kid. Like, if it did, I don't really remember it being on my radar, like, at all. So I came to it later. And then, like I said, nowadays you get people that there are those who say this is the best of all the Batman films.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but that's kind of the legacy this movie eventually got. This is the technically month, but
yeah, we should talk about this theme for the month. This is the first week of our, I guess we're calling it technically month. We have always said that we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release. We've always said that upon release, when it comes out, it's poorly received. Now, typically, we're talking about movies that, in general, to this day, have a fairly poor reception. But the movies we're covering this month had a rocky start, but have gone on to build a bit of a legacy of their own. So it's a little bit of a tweak to our premise, but not really. Technically, all these movies still qualify. So we're starting with this one, this animated Batman film that, flew under the radar is the best way to put it. Like, it's technically a theatrical release by a major studio. And here we are, two people that were like the prime age to grow up with it, and we didn't know it existed.
We didn't. And you can look a little bit at the box office, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And I think that number even includes several of the subsequent re-releases that came of this. But this movie kind of somehow flew under the radar when it came out, which is a little strange for how popular the show was.
Yeah, it was intended to be a straight-to-video release, and then during production, they switched it to theatrical, which, cool. But because of that, I think there was almost no marketing. It gets a holiday release like we're about to talk about, but a very strange story, the production of this and its eventual legacy. But I think it's time that we can jump into it, Andrew. This movie was released Christmas Day, December 25th of 1993. It's made on a budget of $6 million. And at the box office, it brings in $5.6 million. It has a micro budget and does not make back its production budget. Critically, however, it is pretty well received. It holds an 82% on Rotten Tomatoes currently. However, it's, I think, 58, 59 reviews. They are not all historical. As we've said, like, this movie has garnered just a greater and greater reputation. I did try to dive back to look specifically at historical reviews from 1993. I read one from the Washington Post that opens with this. Closer to a radio drama than Kitty Fair, Batman Mask of the Phantasm is the strangest PG film of the year. I think that's a pretty good way to put it, because when you hear it's an animated Batman film based on a Fox Kids TV show, you're thinking a kid movie. And again, this is intended for kids, but yeah, they push the envelope at times, do some stuff that they would not be able to do on television. There is a few darker themes, no cursing, but like you see a dead body, you see Batman bleeding, you see a few things. So I imagine for adults, for critics, for people that aren't really plugged into what's going on here, what you see on the poster, what you see in the trailer, than what you see when you go to theaters, it's probably a bit jarring at times.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is definitely, there was definitely more than one moment where I was like, oh, that's a little more than I was expecting there. So, yeah, definitely taking advantage of some of those rating things and putting them on full display.
Now, the creative team is essentially the team that worked on the animated series. We have writing credits for Alan Burnett, who is a series creator and frequent writer on the show. Paul Dini, who is, if the show had a lead writer, probably Paul Dini, responsible for creating a lot of the best episodes, as well as the character of Harley Quinn, and went on to be a very prolific comic book writer. Martin Pasco, who did pass away a few years ago, R.A.P., but he's the only one on here. I didn't see a lot of credits from the TV show, more in the comic book realm. So they brought him on to help punch up the script here. And then Michael Reeves, who, again, also comes from a writer on the TV show, as well as a slew of other TV shows. The man has a very extensive career and credits in television.
Yeah, so it's quite a array of writers on this movie, but like you said, the people behind the scenes, you've got Alan Burnett, who's still working on DC animated projects like now. The Justice League versus the Fatal Five movie that just came out, and he's a co-producer on so many of the animated DC movies that come out, and just a kind of a guy that's been there the whole time, really, in a lot of different ways. Obviously, Paul Dini speaks for himself. I mean, he's, at this point, his comics writing work is pretty well lauded. He's, in my opinion, the man who made Hush a far more interesting character with several of the Hush stories that he did in the aftermath of the original.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The only person who wrote an interesting Hush story after Hush is Paul Dini.
Yeah. And then Martin Pasco, like I said, he wrote comics for a really long time. His heyday was probably the mid 70s to the late 80s. A lot of his stuff was like 74, 75 into like 83, 84. And then kind of moved into some nonfiction and some animation stuff as well. So like you said, quite the array of talent here. And Bruce Timm. Did we talk about Bruce Timm? And
well, Bruce Timm doesn't have a writing credit, interestingly, because I feel like when it comes to creators of the animated series, Bruce Timm is always the first one that people mention. And there's even the Bruce Timm verse of Batman material that is going on to this day. Now, he is responsible for the design of the show, and his original concepts and storyboards and character designs are all from Bruce Timm, so that's why he gets so much credit. But as we've established, there's a lot of collaborators and creators of the show.
Yep.
So he has a directing credit, and he shares it with Eric Radomski, who was also a co-creator of the show. So a lot of people go into this, but again, Bruce Timm's name is usually the first one out there. Let's talk about Bruce Timm. He's one of the Batman creators that there's a few of them that create iconic all-time Bat stories, and they keep creating Bat stories and eventually create baffling Batman stories. This seems to be a trend with the character. I guess we don't have to talk about some of his newer stuff.
You don't need to talk about Killing Joke.
Batman and Harley Quinn is another bizarre one. But anyway, for his work on the animated series, I mean, you got to give the man a lot of credit, because the look of this show and the design, the noir stuff, the dark deco, as they called it, architecture in the show, the timeless feel of the designs, where it could be the 90s, it could be the 30s. It's just Gotham City. It's just Batman's Gotham City. I mean, you really can't praise that look enough. And of course, he's very instrumental in that look. Eric Radomski, I'm not as familiar with, but looking at his credits, really worked in a lot of animated television. Also a producer on Spawn, the animated series, and Freakazoid. Remember that one? What a weird show that was. And is currently with Marvel Animation, so we jump sides there. But again, just a very impressive body of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce Timm's kind of work speaks for itself, but notably known for being more of an artist versus a writing force necessarily. And like the look of the DC animated universe, especially as you get into like the New Adventures of Batman and Justice League, that's basically, that style is how Bruce Timm draws things. So there's this, so like the entire animated style of that series is based very heavily on his drawing style. So you know, there were other people that definitely other people that contributed, like notably Mike Mignola is the one who designs Mr. Freeze in Batman the Animated Series. He's the one that comes up with that look, just because apparently Bruce Timm requested he do that because he wanted Mr. Freeze to kind of resemble some characters that Mignola has done at that point, which is just really cool. So, you know, again, speaking to the collaborative nature of it, but Bruce Timm was very much, as far as that aesthetic goes, as far as that design goes, I think he's definitely the one you look at as far as where that comes from. And that look of Gotham, I mean, it's still kind of how I see Gotham City in a lot of ways. And it's coming from like a Batman 89 kind of sort of idea, but it adds a lot of that kind of, that like 50s idea of the future, that kind of retro futuristic style. I forget there's a term for that, but I forget what it is. And that's even more ironic here because they're at a Gotham World's Fair where they have like the house of the future. And I'm like, your city's already kind of designed like that.
Yeah.
But complete with blimps. But it's boo, man. But it's still a very cool look. And it's funny to me because, you know, this movie is pulling from Batman 89 in a lot of ways. But the aesthetic of Batman 89 is almost wholesale that of Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Like if you watch Brazil, you're just going to be like, oh, these guys are in Gotham City. So it's just this weird sequence of like, this is inspired by this, which is inspired by this. How far back does this go? And you realize that just everything is inspired by everything. Even if the inspiration is don't do that. So, you know, it all feeds back into itself.
Before we jump into the film, while we're talking about the creative, or talking about the creators, gotta shout out Mike W. Barr, who does not have a credit on this film, but he wrote a miniseries called Batman Year 2. The reason I bring him up is because Batman Year 2 does feature a Grim Reaper-like villain with a mystery behind their identity. There's a lot of similarities between his story and the film that we got. Now, there were official statements by the creators of this movie, people like that we just talked about, where they said, oh, it's totally coincidental. I didn't even know about that story until afterwards. But that does not seem to be the case because Mike Barr claims that he was often in the writing room, in the studio, saw his book opened as writers are literally creating this story. And because of that, he spoke with Paul Levitz, who was running DC at the time, and they worked out a deal where he got some compensation from the box office of this film. So clearly it was more than just coincidental influence. Not trying to like throw shade at anybody. It's a tricky thing, but regardless, I think he's deserving of credit.
I agree completely. Mike W. Barr is actually probably one of the more underrated comics creators. People don't talk about him enough, I don't think. Also, Batman Year 2, drawn in part by a gentleman named Todd McFarlane. One of his only official DC works before, you know, he did that thing over at Marvel and then that other thing at Image. Can't remember what they were called, though. Yeah, and it's such a weird thing because, like, you know, a lot of the, like, he did the Batman Son of the Demon graphic novel, which is the Ra's al Ghul, however you want to say it, like a lot of that stuff, and they used that in Batman the Animated Series and stuff like that. So it's this very odd thing where like they clearly were using parts of his work in other stories within the show. So it seems odd that they'd kind of shy away from admitting that here. But the one thing I will say, you mentioned Paul Levitz, he was extremely good about making sure that anybody whose work was being used in any medium was properly compensated for it. Like, in an era of, Marvel creators saying that they're getting pennies on the dollar for characters they've created that are now being used in movies, which may be better now. I'm not sure. But like, to the point that Jim Starlin, I've probably mentioned this before, said that his check from DC for KG Beast, who is technically in Batman v Superman. And you may be wondering, I don't remember anybody in that movie called KG Beast, and you would be correct. The character's name is used with one of the thugs. Jim Starlin said his check for KG Beast was bigger than his check for Thanos in Guardians of the Galaxy. And like,
wow.
Like that, again, this is stuff that all kind of like seemingly got sort of resolved. Jim Starlin and Marvel kind of sort of patched things up, and they kind of let Jim Starlin just write a whole bunch of Thanos graphic novels for a few years there. And I don't know. It's one of those things where they didn't, in an era where it feels like creators are having less and less leverage and being appreciated less and less. And Paul Levitz, unfortunately, is no longer at the top of DC. But while he was there, that was one of the things he was super, super good about, was making sure that everybody got their due. One last thing I do want to say about Mike W. Barr, though, people, he's one of those creators that like, just a workman that kind of was around all the time, did a lot of different stuff, but he wrote 2 books that, he had a big run on the original version of The Outsiders. That was probably one of the biggest comic books things that he's known for. Outside of the Batman stuff that he did, although it was a Batman adjacent book, Batman and the Outsiders, and then eventually it becomes kind of its own thing. But he also did a little book I really like called Camelot 3000, which is basically a future King Arthur story set, get this, in the year 3000.
No way.
Big shock, I know. But I think the book is really, really fun. It's drawn by Brian Boland, the Killing Joke
One
artist.
of the greatest artists of all time, sure.
And it's one of the few sort of long form things he's done. Like, you look at Brian Boland's interior work, it's pretty limited in the grand scheme of things. Like, there's stuff he's done.
His style is so detailed. There's no way he can keep up with a monthly book.
He can't. And arguably one of the only things that he did do for a long time was Judge Dredd, which he did for a while. But even then, he'd like come in for like 8 pages here and then disappear and then come back for 8 more pages here and do stuff like that. So Camelot 3000 being a full 12 issues of interior art is kind of just insane. And he mostly became known for covers. That's kind of what he really kind of got. It's kind of what he does even now for the most part, is covers. But just wanted to shout out Camelot 3000 because it's pretty great. But it's a good catch, because if you guys look at the Grim Reaper from Batman Year 2, he's even got the blades on his hands. Like, come on, guys. Like, it's all right there.
All right. Well, with that being said, I think it's time that we jump into this film. Andrew, everything we like about this movie, all the positives, what it does well. Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. Are you ready?
Yes.
When a new Grim Reaper-like villain begins killing mobsters of Gotham City, the police mistakenly suspect Batman is to blame. As he works to uncover the true identity of the killer, his former fiancée, Andrea Beaumont, returns to Gotham after walking out on their relationship early in his vigilante career. Bruce Wayne once again feels he may be able to walk away from his life of fighting crime and live happily with Andrea. But she has a secret that may be a problem. Spoilers. Andrea is the Phantasm. Hopefully
What?
you've seen this movie. If you're listening to this, it's a classic comic book thing, right? Like we mentioned Hush earlier. I love Hush. It's one of my favorite Bat books. Jim Lee's art, incredible. But early in that book, spoilers for Hush, a new villain shows up. Batman gets his bat rope cut. He falls a big distance. He has a severe injury. And on the operating table with Alfred, he taps in Morse code Tommy. And Alfred's like, oh yeah, your childhood friend Tommy Elliott, who we've never heard of before. And then Tommy Elliott, who's now a surgeon, comes in, fixes him up, and we have this brand new character introduced in this story where at its core, there's a new villain with a mysterious identity. And you gotta wonder, Andrew, if the answer to that one's a little more complicated, but not really.
The old Scott Snyder.
Yes. Remember this character that you've never talked about that plays an important role? I think Batman has a brother in one of them, our half brothers. Anyway, we don't need to get into all that. Hush, good book. Go read it. Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. Andrew, it's a good movie.
Yeah, Batman: Mask of the Phantasm is a very good movie. I don't feel as strongly about Hush as you do, but there's a lot of twists in Hush, folks. So I actually think I enjoy Paul Dini's fleshing out of the character, because there's Heart of Hush, but I think there's one in between. But he does a couple of different Hush stories, and they're all really, really good. But then they did a Hush Beyond, where they tried to do a Hush in the Batman Beyond world, and I was like, what are you doing? Don't do that. Hashtag VP, but don't do that. That Hush is a Batman thing. Don't, or it's a Bruce Wayne thing. Don't try to attach it to the other guy.
Jeff Loeb, writer of Hush, another Batman creator that would go on to do some weird things creatively.
Both creatively and personally. Yeah, we don't need to talk about him very much. But tragic story. Shouldn't say too much.
Yeah, that's rough.
But give yourselves a little look at his Wikipedia. It'll give you some ideas there. But yeah, it's quite a classic comic book trope, though. Especially when it's so weird when it happens now, because obviously these characters are inching towards 100 years old, and you've got these things that's oh, here's a surprise character you've never met before, and it's is it that much of a surprise?
But you have to do that. You can't be so beholden to the history that you can never. Yeah. It's
that's what guys like Grant Morrison would do. Grant Morrison would be the guy who would be you'd be I don't know who this character is, and Grant Morrison would be it's not my fault you haven't read every comic ever published like I have, but
drives me nuts.
He goes so deep into the lore, he finds all these weird little characters that were one-offs and things, and he brings them back and does more with it. But not everybody's going to do that. And again, there's still there's a sense that you can take that random side character, do something new with them, but there's something to be said for adding your own thing to it. And I completely get Scott Snyder with the Court of Owls. The Court of Owls was an original idea that he came up with, and now I'm shocked they haven't been in a movie yet, honestly. I'm waiting for the Court of Owls movie, because I'm sure it will.
It's coming.
That's one of those modern concepts that really caught on, but it requires, turns out there's been a secret society in Gotham this whole time, and it's never run into him before? Ever? pretty interesting that that's happened, but
that's comics. My favorite,
but you got to do it.
Grant Morrison reframing is I've never had to say it out loud. Batman of Zorinar. Is that the colorful
Zorinar,
Batman?
Yeah.
Zorinar?
The red, gold, yellow, purple one.
Who was this?
Yeah.
The original, I don't know. It's this bizarre cosmic Batman. I don't even know the real story there, but he reframes it as a secret identity persona that he created and locked away in a subconscious. So if his mind was ever broken, that personality would take over, and it would still be Batman. He just dresses in a more colorful costume that he makes out of trash. It's so weird.
It's very interesting, because I think the original one is introduced as just another Batman. He's a Batman on another planet. And the ending of that story, which is God, it was a long time ago.
R.A.P. Talking about the Grant Morrison one?
No, I'm talking about the original one.
Oh, okay.
The original one, I think, is from the 50s, and it's like Batman 112, 113. And because I remember like reading this story when Morrison was doing his thing, and like they put out a collection that kind of had like all these classic issues that Morrison was referencing. And the ending of that book, to be fair, leaves it open as to whether or not it actually happened. Like it kind of frames it as this Batman's not really sure if what he did, of what that the events of the book were real or a dream. And then Grant Morrison does it, and he starts introducing that, and uses the character and uses the costume and kind of reframes it. But then Chip Zdarsky actually just brought that thing back again to kind of use the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh again as kind of the and it turns out that when he was the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh at one point, he created a thing called Failsafe, which was basically the contingency plan should Batman turn. And
Okay.
And so of course, what ends up happening? The robot gets activated, and he thinks Batman's turn, and Batman has to fight the contingency plan of himself. So yeah, fun.
Beautiful.
People have some fun with that one, but
comics are great. Go read them.
Comics are great.
We're here to talk about a movie, Andrew, an animated film. I'm excited to talk about it. I guess I didn't, we talked about, we didn't know about this movie growing up, but did eventually watch it. I guess we didn't get too much into our thoughts of it originally, but like, I've always liked this movie. It was maybe built up a little too much the first time I watched it. As we said, some people say it's the best Batman movie ever. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. But by this point, I've seen a lot of good animated Batman movies. I mean, I love Gotham Knight. I love Under the Red Hood. There's another Batman animated series movie called Batman Sub-Zero, Batman vs. Mr. Freeze. There's a lot of good ones. And to me, this was like another good animated Batman movie. But with this rewatch, it's been quite a while since I went back to it. I think it has gone up quite a bit in my appreciation and my, ranking of animated Batman movies. So I've got a lot of good stuff to say about it. But first, we have to talk about this cast, as we always do. And we're going to start with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the movie. Because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the Call of Duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Really curious where you're going with this one, Andrew. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Batman Mask of the Phantasm?
Abe Vigoda, no. No, this is a tough one because your brain tells you there's two options. Inside you, there are two voices in Batman the Animated Series. One
wolf wears a mask, one wolf wears makeup.
Yep.
Oh, I guess he doesn't wear makeup.
Wolf has green hair.
Yeah.
And the other wolf wears a mask. I don't know. And this is tough. But just because he is the foundation of the film versus the other one kind of only being in the latter half of it, I got to go Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne Batman, as the Mark Strong of Batman Mask of the Phantasm. We could talk about Kevin Conroy all day. We could be here
and
for hours
we
talking
will.
about it.
As you saw, this is a 4-hour podcast you're listening to. So
4.
this
Chris, I don't know how many hours you think are in a day, unless you're one of those weird fitness influencers who is like, you think your day's 24 hours. My day's only 4 hours. My day starts at 4 a.m. And from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., that's a full day. I'm not crazy. You're crazy, man. Do you have any more cocaine? Anyway, so as you may have noticed, folks, this episode's actually 24 hours. Anyway, Kevin Conroy is, by many there are a great many people who would say Kevin Conroy is the best Batman. And I would not think they are at all out of line for saying that. It's beyond nostalgia. Like, obviously, a lot of people will be like, oh, you just remember him from your youth, and that's why you think that he's the best Batman. It's like, no, he's actually that good at it. He creates the
100%.
dual voices. You can sense the changes in tone, the changes in inflections. It all comes through. And he's just been there as definitely the longest serving Batman? Maybe not. I don't know if Michael Keaton coming back as in the Flash actually technically.
Yeah, I
gives
mean,
him
Kevin
that-
Conroy
that-
was a lot more consistent from 92 to whenever the last Arkham game
20.
came
I mean,
out,
I think-
or Killing
I think
Joke, maybe his last performance.
Is he in Suicide? He is in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. So that's this year. So Kevin
Well,
Conroy got
It's got to be like flashback or something. I haven't played the game yet, but I'm
he
pretty sure.
recorded. I mean, video games take a long time. He died in November of 22. So,
You think he recorded
no,
before he passed
yeah.
away? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, we're looking at, like you said, 92 to 2024. So that's 32 years.
Okay.
And Keaton was 89 to 2023, which is 34 years. So tied. Anyway, but certainly more consistent. Certainly more. Also had, I guess, more opportunities to return as Batman. Obviously, Michael
Sure.
Keaton coming back as Batman requires a certain set of circumstances that were largely unavailable for a long time. But and all the way through, just doing movies, doing video games, doing other characters. Even got one brief little moment to play a live action version of Bruce Wayne in one of the Arrowverse crossovers. I think it was the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Got to play the kind of jaded Kingdom Come-esque Batman that had killed Superman, so got to even flex a little bit of a dramatic flair there. But he's just so good, and he's always been good. And it's one of those things where you took it for granted a lot, I think, just, it's the voice of Batman. He's so good at it. And then you look back and you're like, wow, he really was that good at playing this character, especially as just the voice. And it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. And even in other stuff, like he got to come into, like, when there was a different Batman animated series, he did an episode where he was Dick Grayson's dad. There was a DC movie where they had somebody else as Batman and he did Thomas Wayne. And then he would, like, do appearances. Like, I know he showed up on the Venture Brothers as a character called Captain Sunshine. And it was just like a fun joke to be like, oh man, the voice of Batman is going to do got to be a guy on our show and things like that, where it's just a blast. So I got to go with not Mark Hamill. I got to go with Kevin Conroy as the I almost said Mark Conroy and I was like, who is that? But Kevin Conroy, just the voice of Batman. I mean, genuinely, essentially my entire life. This man has been the voice of Batman since I was 5.
The voice of Batman. Look, we're going to talk about Mark Hamill. Obviously, he's going to get a lot of praise here. But
Yes.
my Mark Strong award is also going to Kevin Conroy. It's Bruce Wayne / Batman. This story is just so. It's not an origin story, but it really dives into, like, the core of Batman and Bruce Wayne, and he just does such a good job at it. Joker's really a third act character, and he's great when he does his thing, as he always is, but there's just so much more meat on the bone for Kevin Conroy, so gotta go with him for the Mark Strong Award. Yeah, as many people, I'm sure, told the man while he was alive, like, he's the voice of Batman. If I read a Batman comic book, like, that's the voice in my head. Same with Mark Hamill as Joker. I mean, these are just iconic. Almost doesn't even cover it. Like, yeah, it's just the voice of Batman.
Like, that's the thing I would say. Like, I like Jack Nicholson's Joker. I like Michael Keaton's Batman. But for some reason, when I read the comics, they're not who I envision the characters as. These guys are very much that. And it's kind of wild in that regard to just have that kind of subconsciously creep in over the years, where you just realize that, oh, this is how I hear the characters and this is how I view them. And yeah, can't say enough. Like I said, we could be here forever talking about Kevin Conroy. He was the GOAT.
I don't know if I say Kevin Conroy is my favorite Batman straight out, because it is God, I don't want to sound insulting. I was going to say just a voice performance, but it is, voice only. But you've got to, there's, if you're doing the voice and the physical performance and pitting on the suit, it's just different. It's just an ultimate apples and oranges type thing. So easily, hands down, the voice of Batman. It's hard for me to compare him to the live action guys, but yeah, I can't praise the man enough. Super cool guy. R.A.P. Very tragic that he passed away. But what's interesting about his performance here is what's on full display is something that he did early in his work as Batman that he slowly moved away from. And he talked about it quite a bit, is that whenever he first, developed this voice, he had essentially played two separate characters, Bruce Wayne and Batman. When he's not in the suit, he talks, in the higher register, socialite, proper voice. When he's Batman, he uses his iconic, gruff, deep register Batman voice. Very separate. And you'll notice scenes here where, like, he's Bruce Wayne, but, like, he's at Wayne Manor. It's just him and Alfred, and he's talking in his Bruce Wayne voice. As Kevin evolves the character, the voices really merge, and that Bruce Wayne voice is only used if he's, like, intentionally trying to throw someone off his scent or act like he's a clumsy Bruce Wayne in public. But if he's just Bruce Wayne at home with Alfred, he's using the Batman voice. He settles on the Batman voice being his true voice versus the giant gulf that you have here with this performance, which, as we said, this comes after just one season of him playing the character. But by the time you get later into the series, or his appearances later on in the different media in the Timverse or the Arkham Asylum games, very much the Batman voice is his voice, and it is so good. I mean, God, those Arkham games, like, because Kevin Conroy's like so much older by the time he's recording those, and they've got a darker tone than the animated series, and he just still, like, his age plays to the benefit of him playing that darker version of the character.
Absolutely,
it's so good. Like we could talk all day about this. Double Mark Strong Award winner, legend, the GOAT. We love you. We miss you, Kevin Conroy. But we've got to talk about Mark Hamill as the Joker. Alum of the show, Mark Hamill. He plays this other character called Luke Skywalker that we discussed a bit in our Rise of Skywalker episode. Insane that he's like the iconic voice of the Joker and he's Luke Skywalker. I mean, that is two, like, just such huge characters to have under your belt. As a kid, I certainly did not know Luke Skywalker voiced the Joker. I mean, he sort of,
absolutely not.
Like many people with large iconic roles early in the career, struggled to find a place on screen after Star Wars, but reinvents himself and has this whole new career as a voice actor. The Joker is probably his most well known of that, but he has a ton of voice credits. In fact, at the same time he's voicing the Joker, he's also voicing the Hobgoblin on the Spider-Man series, using almost the exact same voice. I mean, you watch the show and, like, Hobgoblin, like, he sounds a lot like the Joker. But done a ton of stuff. Also comes back for the Arkham games and tons of other movies and stuff as this character. And is just, he's the voice of, like, what I consider the classic Joker character.
Absolutely.
To the point where, like, I love Heath Ledger's Joker, but, like, he's the perfect version of that version of Joker in that universe. And I feel like no one can really be classic Joker better than Mark Hamill. Even Jack Nicholson is a bit of a classic Joker, but they gangsterize him a little bit, and he brings a lot of Jack Nicholson to the role. But when I think of, like, just classic, base, original Joker, it's Mark Hamill.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like, Jack Nicholson's Joker has the look of, like these Jokers, like, when they've got the hats on, they look almost exactly the same.
These Jokers.
And, like, obviously every version of Joker has some classic hallmarks, the white face, the green hair, whatever, but there's different versions all over. But Heath Ledger's Joker is very much like just the agent of chaos, like, kind of personified. Like, that's really how Heath Ledger's Joker is. He wants to burn it all down. He's got his plan. With Jack Nicholson, you've got the Jokerisms, but it's just, he's kind of just like a mob boss. that does a few things. With Mark Hamill's Joker, you get what I envision the Joker as most, which is that, yes, he's psychopathic. Yes, he's terrifying. But everything is hilarious to him. Like, that's the thing I think gets lost with the Joker sometimes, is there's this desire to turn him into this, like kind of deadly serious character.
Yeah.
Like, Heath Ledger's Joker, even, like, again, as great as the movie and the performance is, it strays almost a little too far from that for me at times. Where when I'm watching it, I don't necessarily feel like I'm watching the Joker sometimes. Whereas with Mark Hamill, it's just the Joker. Because, like, he's literally in, like he's getting stared down by this person. And Joker is never, like, afraid. He's never scared. He's almost, if anything, he's just always overjoyed at, like, everything. He laughs at everything. Everything is a punchline to him. And yes, there's terrible, awful, horrible things that he does, but there's still this just sense under all of it that he can't not laugh at how funny it all is to him.
And any
And Mark
opportunity
Hamill-
to make a joke, like
He doesn't pass up.
He's fighting the Phantasm in the end of this movie, reaching for a weapon. He passes up the cleaver to grab the salami and slap her with the salami instead of the knife.
Exactly.
Because it's funnier.
It's funnier. It's so much funnier, and like it's too perfect at times with how it is. It's one of those things where, like, it's almost too good, but it works and it completely lands. And it's what I think, hashtag PP. I think one of the things that's missing the most with, like, Leto's Joker is, like, I don't really know what his Joker's deal is. I don't really know what it is he's trying to do.
Yeah.
What would you say it is that you do here? But with
There's
Hamill,
lot
it's never a
missing from that
question.
Joker.
There is, including all of his teeth. But it's Hamill is just so perfect at it. The voice he gets is everything is just absolutely
and the laugh,
perfect.
the best
The
Joker laugh,
obviously,
like
the best.
so good.
And there's so many different ones too. Like, people think of, like, there being just one Joker laugh, but at the same time, like, he's got like 7 Joker laughs, and they're all like, he's got like the low kind of like, I'm being menacing and like setting the mood laugh, and then there's just the laugh out loud. I'm in the middle of the climax of this movie and everything's about to go horribly wrong, but it's still pretty funny, isn't it? And he's just howling, laughing, and he does all the different levels so perfectly, and it's just great. And Mark Hamill, as we talked about there, just also great. I like that he's gotten to come back and do a few more live action things in the last couple of years. Outside Luke Skywalker, he had an episode of What We Do in the Shadows that he showed up in on. He was just recently in the Fall of the House of Usher Netflix series, where he plays kind of the family lawyer who's just like a real skis ball, and he's just so good at it. Has a lot of really great, powerful scenes there. I even really liked, he actually, way back in the day, I don't know if I talked about this on the Star Wars episode or if I talked about it at all before, but he actually has 2 episodes of The Flash in the 1990-91 Flash.
the trickster, right?
Plays the trickster in 2 episodes of that show before he plays the Joker, which is something that people are kind of like, oh yeah, he played the Joker, so they had him do the trickster. Like, no. He actually does the Flash before he does the trickster, or before he does Batman. And then they actually brought him back in the CW Flash to play like an aged version of that same type of character, which I thought was super, super cool. And if you watch him as the trickster, you're going to be like, oh, we're seeing a little bit of it here, aren't we? And yeah, you are. Like, it's this weird sort of evolution that you're watching in real time. But the episodes that he's on of The Flash are a particular delight. That was the John Wesley Shipp show. That was definitely a post-Batman thing, because the central city that he lives in, dark, tall buildings, looks a lot like Gotham City, has a theme song by Danny Elfman. We just ran with it. A lot of focus. That's actually the thing. The show goes to a lot of focus to kind of like make some of the villains seem like kind of like darker and like more serious. And James the Trickster is one of the ones where they were like, nah, just make him the trickster. Just do the thing. And so he's wearing the bright, ridiculous colors. He's doing all the dumb jokes and everything. And it's just perfect. So there's 2 episodes of The Flash that he's on. They're both great. And then he does, I think, 3 episodes of the CW Flash where he kind of plays an older version of the trickster alongside a younger version of the trickster. And it's all really great. And Mark Hamill, it just turns out pretty cool.
Pretty cool guy. I agree. Andrea Romano, who's the voice director for Batman the Animated Series, and actually the namesake of our character, Andrea Beaumont, talked about recording with the cast, who all recorded together, which is very unusual in animation. But she said Mark Hamill is the only one that never sat down. Everyone typically, they get in the booth, they sit in their stool, they read their lines, but he had to stand and physically act everything out with his crazy laughs and everything, and brought that energy that you hear like into the recording booth. And when he talked about the role, he said he just imagined he was on like a radio program, like an old Shadow or whatever. Like that's the energy that he brought to it, and you can totally, I think, hear it in his performance, and it's just, yeah, again, iconic, so good. Also, comes back for the Arkham games, and his age helps with that tone and that character and what it goes through stuff. So, yeah,
I'm gonna have to play those games again, man.
Yeah, they're so good. I'm sure there'll be I don't think they've
remaster.
Yeah, I think
remade. The
first two were PS3. They remade it for PS4. I'm sure there's a PS5 trilogy coming, especially with the Kill the Justice League.
I have it on PS5. I think I have it on PS5, but it's probably just the PS4 collection that I can play there. But even then, I got to go in and do it.
Good stuff.
Yep.
Well, hey, there's other people to talk about in this movie. Everyone's bringing.
Are there though?
But there is. Let's talk about Dana Delaney as Andrea Beaumont. Slash the Phantasm, although I think the voice of the Phantasm is not her, but it's her character with a voice changer that sounds a lot like her character's dad. Little red herring there. But she does a great job. Her main role here is to be like a believable romance for Bruce Wayne. I mean, this movie has a romance at its core, and it's like really well done. It's like it's a really good Batman love story. In their meet cute, their flirtatious ways, and then later after the flashback, so they meet in the present day, where she has to be a little cold to him at first, but he leaves the room and she starts crying. It's obviously breaking her heart to do so. It's really good. She's ultimately a very tragic character, as we learn about her secret, her motivation, and how she feels that she needs to be alone. She's destined to be alone despite loving this man. Of course, Bruce Wayne ends up in a very similar situation. Both very tragic characters. I think the love story here is just so well done, and it wouldn't work well without a talented voice actor in that role, and Dana is more than up to the task.
Yeah, absolutely. Dana, also no stranger to DC projects in the future, becomes the notable voice of Lois Lane throughout all of the Superman-related animated stuff that comes in the mid to late 90s and into the 2000s, alongside Tim Daly and George Newbern as Superman. But yeah, she's doing a good job here, and she's also like a prolific, actor in live-action films as well. Has appearances in a whole bunch of things, including Tombstone, Exit to Eden, and a little movie called Wide Awake, Chris.
Who directed that, Andrew?
A little gentleman named M. Night Shyamalan.
Never heard of him.
I told you guys, everything inspires everything. But and still out there. She was also on Desperate Housewives, and then still does things today. But she's doing a good job here playing this character. There's a lot of tragic Bruce love stories. There is people like Vesper Fairchild, Silver St. Cloud, even, you get his romances with Talia al Ghul, you get the stuff with even Wonder Woman, the hints and teases there. They've definitely played with Bruce Wayne romances before. Catwoman, obviously probably the most notable.
Yeah, there's something, if Bruce Wayne went to therapy, he would probably need to dive into why his greatest loves are masked vigilantes that can't seem to stay on the right side of the law. There's probably something to unpack there, Andrew.
I mean, there's probably stuff they also need to unpack. But because Bruce Wayne definitely doesn't have any issues like parental issues of any kind. There's nothing there for sure. Nothing he needs to unpack there either. So, There was a that just reminds me. I always there was a line it's a show called Documentary Now. I don't know if you've ever watched it.
I have not.
It's by like Fred Armisen and Bill Hader and Seth Meyers are kind of the guys behind it, but they basically spoof like real documentaries, but they like shift the content around to be something that's just genuinely funnier. So there's one in particular called Any Given Sunday Afternoon that instead of being a documentary about football, it's a documentary about a bowling league. And the hip bowlers, like the famous bowlers, are played by Michael C. Hall, Tim Robinson, and Bobby Monahan from SNL.
This already sounds like the greatest show of all time, Andrew.
It's very funny.
I'm sold.
This particular episode is great also. And like there's just a whole bunch of and every episode, like Fred Armisen is in a lot of the episodes and things like that too. But in this episode, Michael C. Hall's character is like very reserved. Like he's like 40, but he lives at like a senior apartment building because he just enjoys hanging out with the old people and playing their weird sports. But at the end of the episode, he's like, yeah, so I figured, but at one point in the episode, they do an interview and he just spills all this terrible stuff about his childhood. And everyone's just like, whoa, what? And so at the end of the episode, he's like, yeah, so I went to a therapist to try to start unpacking a lot of the issues from my childhood. And I realized that, whoa, this is making me a worse bowler. So I cut that out. I view Batman would be very similar. Like he'd go to therapy and he'd start feeling like he doesn't need to be Batman. And he'd just be like, whoa, so I had to cut that out. It just got him hang out on these roofs, guys. But
that should be a Batman villain. Their plan is to be a therapist that talks to Bruce Wayne so he stops being Batman so they can hatch their villain plan.
Oh, man. You could have taken that turn of Batman Forever with Chase Meridian, but it turned out she was just an actually good therapist. How dare she? But
we have to get to the root of the problem. Yeah, Batman. No, his trauma. Solve that. You will stop Batman. Good stuff.
Anyway, yeah. So very funny. But anyway, so Andrea Beaumont here, I do like the character. I think it's a very interesting character. They actually did bring this character into the comics recently. It had been kind of one of those things that hadn't, but Tom King did a 12-issue Batman Catwoman miniseries that was kind of a PS to his Batman run that kind of ended prematurely for Tom King is either the best Batman writer or the worst, depending on who you ask, basically. Like, it feels like there's nobody that was just like, yeah, it was fine. It feels like everybody's like, man, this was really good, or this sucked. And so they kind of took him off the main book and gave him like a 12-issue thing with Batman and Catwoman to be like, just do whatever else you wanted to do here. And in that book, he brings in Andrea Beaumont and the Phantasm. The first time that had happened, that character did not make the jump as quickly as some other characters from the animated series did. But I like everything that's happening with that character. I think and I'm actually kind of shocked that even within the animated series, they never really went back to it very much. So they're both still out there. Did they, though? Did they ever go back to that?
In the animated series, they did not, unless maybe extended stuff, Justice League later, but not.
Oh, it looks like it was. It looks like it was in like comics and stuff. They did some stuff, but it doesn't count.
Hart Bochner plays Arthur Reeves. In the present day, he's a city councilman at Gotham, but in our flashback sequences, he is the legal counsel to Andrea's businessman father, who we learn is maybe dealing with some less than reputable people, and it catches up to him.
Less than savory.
And Arthur, it's revealed, kind of sells out her father. Like many political figures in Gotham City, he is prone to corruption and looking out for himself. Pretty skeezy. Through most of this movie, though, he's hitting on Andrea when she comes back, really trying to put the moves on her. I don't know. Really trying to I'm not going to be gross here, but he's pursuing her very hard. How about that? So yeah, a little skeezy, a little slime ball, if you will. But the voice performance here is very appropriate for this type of character.
Well, it's funny you say that because it's not like Hart Bochner is known at all for playing that type of character literally all the time. Because you guys may remember him as Ellis from Die Hard. the man who notably asks for a Coca-Cola and then gets shot in the face by Alan Rickman.
It's almost too perfect, like him being that guy in Die Hard voicing this character.
There are only 5 years between Die Hard and this movie.
Weird.
That seems very strange to me to think about. Like, Die Hard is 88, and that feels so much later than I would assume it was from. I don't know why, but it does.
Like, when he's cast here, Die Hard was a recent hit. But
like
they feel like
91, 92, like it would be a recent thing. Anyway, that's always strange to me to actually look at things like that. Anyway, also the director of such films as PCU, High School High, if you're into your weird 90s comedies starring comedians who maybe shouldn't have been given their own movies, #PP. But anyway, he's great in this role. Like I say, he's perfect. Obviously, this character basically just is Ellis from Die Hard. Like, it really is basically just the same thing. And he does a great job bringing, like, he's just so unlikable. Like, you can't even believe, like, the fact he's the kind of guy that, like, when Andrea's hanging out with him, you're just like, why are you doing this? And then you eventually find out why, obviously. But, like, he's just like, ugh.
Now, we got a couple of characters that we're going to talk about here, voice performances, where I'm going to say something kind of the same about all of them. So let's look at Stacy Keach, who plays Carl Beaumont. This is Andrea's father. Technically, they use his voice for the Phantasm as well. So he plays like...
Technically? No, they do use his voice.
Okay, they use his... Well, I say technically because, like, if you say he's... I don't want to say he's the Phantasm, because he never is the Phantasm. So it's not his character voicing the Phantasm. It's just his voice. I don't know. Whatever. Call me out on it if you want.
Just listening to you try to separate how he voices both of them, but only technically voices it. That was
he plays one character
that you got to know real conclusion on.
He plays one character in this movie. He only plays Carl Beaumont. Right?
I would not. We're not doing this. Move on.
But his voice is that of the Phantasm, but he does not play the Phantasm.
No, I would say he does play the Phantasm. The Phantasm is just not the same character as the other one he voices.
Agree to disagree, Andrew.
Well, no, because your argument, I'm guessing, is that the Phantasm is actually Andrea, therefore he's not technically voicing the Phantasm.
Correct.
But he's providing the voice for the Phantasm. So he is voicing the Phantasm.
But not the character of the Phantasm.
That's a different thing. He is not voicing the alter ego of the Phantasm. He is voicing the Phantasm, though.
All right. Fair enough. His voice as the Phantasm is very good, appropriately spooky, and I like it. Now, his voice as Carl Beaumont, again, the businessman that's dealing with, gets caught up in the mob and owes him a lot of money. It's good. He sounds like a distinguished man, a little frazzled, loves his family. It's good. Like, nailed it. Good job. Like, it's like, no matter how good you are at this, it's not going to be like we're talking about it for Mark Strong or anything. It's just like, they voiced the right guy for that. Good job.
Did we talk about him on something else? Was it Sin City 2?
Stacy Keach?
I feel like it was. I thought we talked about him more recently for something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm thinking of. I thought there was something we talked about him on, but I felt like it was more recently than Sin City 2.
Andrew, I don't know.
I mean, he's in Planes and Planes Fire and Rescue. I don't know if there's a Cars link here that I'm not remembering.
No.
I don't know. Must be losing my mind. Been known to happen. Move on.
Anything you'll say about his performance?
Oh yeah, he's good.
Nailed it. Okay, good. Abe Vigoda plays Salvatore the Weezer Valestra. He is one of the mobsters that is being hunted down in the present day, or at least he feels like he's going to be hunted down because all his colleagues are getting killed. He, he's got to use an oxygen tank because he's very old and, smoked a lot. It's good. He sounds like a mobster. He sounds like an old mobster in the present day. He nailed it.
If I had a nickel for every time Abe Vigoda was in a movie where he played a mobster named Salvatore, I'd have 3 nickels. It's not a lot.
It kind of is a lot. It kind of is a lot. I mean, currency-wise, I guess.
Well, to be fair, 2 of those movies, he's playing the same character.
Okay.
But he's in The Godfather 1 and 2 as Salvatore Tessio, and then he's also in this as Salvatore Valestra. But yeah, I was like, they said his name was Salvatore, and then I saw his name. I was like, wait a second, we've done this before, haven't we? And yes, he has. Yeah, it's another one. It reminds me a little bit of that guy from Breaking Bad who always needed the oxygen tank to speak. Same energy, but yeah, he's good.
R.I.P. to Abe Vigoda. Now we have a few voice performances that come from the animated series that we have to acknowledge. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Zimbalist. Thank you. I just realized as I was saying it, I've never had to say it out loud. He's the voice of Alfred Pennyworth. Man, this guy is like underrated as Alfred.
Underrated.
One of my favorite Alfreds, maybe my favorite Alfred in all of Batman media, because
so much sass.
Does not put up with the stuff, but is obviously very caring for Bruce Wayne and loves him and very paternal. I personally don't like when Alfred gets too much into he's like his doctor and his man in the chair and is too much on the Batman stuff. I like him as the caretaker, the one that really wants the best for Bruce Wayne, even if it means he walks away from Batman. Like his greatest dream would be he can let go of Batman, because he loves the man. That's where I like
End of Dark Knight Rises. End of Dark Knight Rises is like, that's the moment that Alfred is always just waiting for, when he actually sees Bruce Wayne, just right. Bruce Wayne somewhere.
Spoilers for Dark Knight Rises.
Sorry, it's 11 years old now, or 12 years old now, folks. Anyway, I do want to talk about Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. because, first off, super underrated as Alfred. So much sass. Like, he clearly can assist, but he doesn't here. Like, it's not like the DCEU where he's literally just the guy in the chair for Batman, and Michael Caine like rides the line decently as far as like doing both. Kind of, he's obviously very capable, very accomplished, very technical if he needs to be, but still has that very paternal instinct. Whereas I don't really get that vibe from Jeremy Irons' Alfred. Jeremy Irons still, I think, a fantastic pick for Alfred. But just the way they're playing that character is more an assistant and less as a paternal figure.
Right.
Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. has done a great job. He was Alfred throughout all of this. Did a couple of appearances in Justice League Unlimited as well. And then I think he kind of phases out of doing things for the most part. And then he also does pass away in 2014. But to be fair, he was 95. So he had an extremely good run with an extremely accomplished career. And he's actually another one that, like, in the 50s and the 60s, accomplished television, like live action television actor. There's a show that I actually genuinely like called 77 Sunset Strip, where it's a private detective drama series. Because of course it's a thing that I like. It's a private detective show. And he stars on it. Like, he's the main guy. And so it's so wild to like see him as like the lead of this show and then compare that to like Alfred. It's wild. But just a super accomplished actor throughout his life, very underrated as Alfred. The sass he brings, even in this movie, is great. I love the scene where he's talking to Bruce, and Bruce is like, "You act like you know everything about me," and Alfred's like, "Yeah, because I changed your diapers." And then Bruce Wayne, like in the giant, most teenage moment, goes, "Well, you don't," and then gets in the car and drives off. And I was like, "What a teenager! What a teenage response!" But just so great as the character, and I'm glad that they did find a way to involve him in this as well.
Bob Hastings plays Commissioner Gordon. We're only talking about him because he plays Commissioner Gordon and has such a big role in the animated series, because in this movie, not a lot for him to do. We see that whenever they call for a manhunt on Batman after these killings start happening, he says, absolutely no way. I don't believe this is Batman. We're not going to do that. That's his big role here. But he's out of the film. I think by the time we're at the halfway point, we don't really see him again. But again, a very good, I don't know if I don't go quite as far as like if I read a comic book with Gordon, I hear his voice like we did with our two leads. But still, up there in that ballpark, I would say. Just a classic take on Gordon.
Yep, absolutely. Bob Hastings, also a legend of the small screen. Was on McHale's Navy, actually voiced Archie Andrews from the Archie comics on a radio drama for like 8 years. So no stranger to the old comic book adaptations. But yeah, just the classic voice for Commissioner Gordon that I think, like I said, not to the level of the others, probably because he didn't do it as long. He kind of goes through about 03, 04, and then kind of stops being associated with that character. He also passes in 2014 at the age of 89.
Good run.
Again, a very good run with, like I said, a quite a career to speak back on.
And Robert Costanzo plays Harvey Bullock. Now, if you're familiar with the AMA series, you know this is the guy that's on the police force that does not like Batman and wants to take him down. Although he does secretly kind of like him. Spoilers for the series. I like this character. I don't know if I've had a chance to say this before on the podcast, so I got to say it now. It's insane to me that when they created this character for the animated series, they create a new character on the police force, doesn't like Batman, very cool. They named him Harvey. There's already a Harvey in Batman, a very famous Harvey. And that's wild to me that they just like, yeah, we'll use the name again. It reminds me of this.
Chris, are you implying that Harvey Bullock is created for the animated series?
Is that not right?
It is not.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Do I have to cut this out now? When does
you're leaving it in. So he's just Lieutenant Bullock in the 70s. They identify him as Harvey Bullock in the 80s.
Damn.
Now, don't get me wrong. Your argument applies to absolutely whoever named him Harvey Bullock in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But not to these people.
I could have sworn he came from...
You're probably thinking of Knox from... Not Knox. Eckhart from Batman 89. Like, that character, not using Harvey Bullock for that character was really weird. But Eckhart's not named Harvey, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, that ruins it.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today.
One note about this character's design, though. This is something that I think was pointed out by a friend of the show, past guest, Justin Michael, on his wonderful podcast, Batman, the Animated Podcast, that Harvey Bullock, his character, is such a fat guy that his ears are cinnamon buns. And
Jesus Christ.
Look at his design. Like, Google image
no.
Harvey Bullock animated series. This series has the general realistic depiction of ears, but Harvey Bullock has little cinnamon buns for ears.
I'm not looking it up.
Look it up. I got to get your reaction on Mike.
I won't. I don't.
It's hilarious. Do it.
I don't want to. Oh God. I guess he's not real. So.
Yeah, we're not making fun of a real person.
Oh God. What the hell?
You see it? A little cinnamon
What's that
bun.
weird swirl? Why is there a little weird swirl on the side of his head instead of an ear?
Yeah, cinnamon bun ears.
Why? It's like
And he
there's an ear
loves
shape
donuts.
and they just drew it around. But the cinnamon buns are not donuts.
No, he loves donuts. His character is like always eating donuts. So he's such a fat guy. He
That's
loves donuts and has cinnamon bun ears.
Oh God, that's no. Anyway, Robert Costanzo, also notable for playing the really annoying cop at the beginning of Die Hard 2. So if I had a nickel for every movie where he plays an annoying cop, I'd have 2 nickels.
And
Anyway.
every cast member of this movie that also had a role in the Die Hard franchise. 2 nickels.
Yes, 2 nickels. My God. Anyway, God, moving on. Jesus.
All right, one last shout out here. Arlene Sorkin, the original voice of Harley Quinn and the inspiration for the character itself, does have a small cameo here. She's early in the movie as a young socialite hitting on Bruce Wayne, who says the line that we used in the intro of this podcast about engagement and gets the wrong letter that it starts with. It's just nice that they included her. They did decide to not use the character of Harley Quinn. They wanted a classic Batman versus Joker, but they still worked her into the movie, which I think is pretty cool. And it seems kind of silly to say because she originates the character, but still my favorite voice of Harley. There, by the time you get to the Arkham series, she's been replaced by someone else and does
Tara
a good
Strong.
job. God bless her. But Arlene Sorkin is Harley.
I think Tara Strong has been Harley Quinn for a long time now, so I think she inherited that role. Also, rest in peace to Arlene Sorkin.
Yes.
Passed away last year, age of 67. Complications from pneumonia and MS. So, unfortunate. But I'm glad she did get a little bit of a part here. Yeah, just a little thing. But they wanted Batman versus Joker, which they would do occasionally in the show, too. Even after Harley Quinn showed up, there would be episodes that had Joker without Harley. That I think they even did. There's at least one where it's Harley without Joker, too. So
There's a few because she teams up with Poison Ivy and they start their relationship. So she's not always around Joker.
Yep.
All right, Andrew. That covers the cast. Let's talk about this film. All our favorite parts, all the best scenes of the movie, starting with the high point, the best scene of the movie. So in your opinion, when is this film firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in Batman Mask of the Phantasm?
I got to go with our finale at the abandoned Gotham World's Fair just because it's really cool set pieces. We got a Batman and Joker fight in a giant, in like a model of Gotham, so they get to look like kaiju fighting through a giant city. It's ridiculous. This is when everything comes to a head. Obviously, Andrea tracks down the Joker because Joker is kind of the last missing piece of her getting revenge for what happened to her father. Because we do find out that Joker used to be one of the gangsters in Valestra's gang that basically went and killed the elder Beaumont. And so Joker's kind of the last one she needs to get. And so she starts off, tracks down Joker. I love that Joker's hiding out in this like apartment of the future with like the robot wife. It's just so on brand. You don't know that he actually lives here. You just know that he enjoys hanging out here enough that people know to find him here.
Yeah.
That was the other part I love. Like when Valestra like goes here and is like, "Hey, Joker," and Joker just appears, and it's like, is this just known?
Is it his
Why doesn't
home? Is it
Batman
his
come here?
office? Well, it's just like how like Mr. Freeze is always in like an old ice cream factory, like the most obvious place you would think he's gonna be.
Yeah, it's like he's got to cycle his operation every 3 months so Batman doesn't find him. But anyway, it is, so you start off here with Andrea and Joker, and Joker's figured it out. I actually have got another cool little plot there, just reminding us that, hey, Joker's actually pretty smart.
Yeah.
Beneath everything, it's kind of terrifying. But so he knows that this is Andrea because he knows Carl Beaumont is dead. Like, he knows Carl Beaumont is dead. So he's like, well, the only person who'd be really wanting to do this, because like that's the piece that other people don't know. They don't know that Carl Beaumont is dead. So he knows that. So they start fighting off, and they start off fighting, and like, so this is where we get picks up the bologna and hits him with the bologna instead of the knife because it's funnier, and he is correct. He is 100% correct. Then eventually Batman shows up, and this is where Batman has put it all together as well. So we have Batman kind of pleading with Andrea that this is basically, you can't do this. This is going to end. Like the sequence here where she's getting pulled into this giant wind turbine. So Batman just like launches his motorcycle into the turbine to blow it up first. Just cool. Just cool, big action set pieces. You kind of have that final moment where Bruce Wayne kind of pleads with Andrea to like let this go, and this doesn't have to be it, basically. And she kind of tells him, no, this is it. And kind of vanishes as the whole World's Fair is blowing up. The animation here is really, really great. It all looks very cool. The matte painting backgrounds obviously just create that real kind of grand sense of scale. And it's just very cool. And like you said, it's kind of where all the intrigue and mystery has built up, and it kind of gives us all very satisfying climax to all of that. And like I said, you get some emotional beats with Bruce Wayne and Andrea. You obviously get Mark Hamill just chewing every bit of this robotic scenery with his Joker performance. And you get kind of a bittersweet ending here where you're kind of left with this open-ended question of, well, what happened? But it's great. I love it a lot. It's the climax the movie deserves, and it delivers in spades.
It's this finale has everything. I mean, you talked about the big turbine, the motorcycle. Joker has a jetpack for a large segment of the action set piece. They fight in a miniature model of Gotham City. There's so much going on here, tons of explosions. And they mentioned that whenever they decided to release this theatrically, they did bump up the production budget a bit. A lot of it went to this. They really ramped it up during the finale here. And it all works. It's all great. First off, I want to talk about how we were talking about how this version of Joker really gets to the core of who Joker is, which is always going for the laugh, always making jokes. So much so that he is flirting with this robot wife of his when no one's around. He's making jokes about their romantic evening, and no one's there to hear them. We also get one of the more risque jokes when the Phantasm does show up, and he's like, "Oh, isn't that always how it goes? You get in the mood, and then an uninvited guest shows up, and it's like, what? Okay, you gotta have sex with that robot, Joker? Is that the joke here? Okay."
I was like, Joker, you about to have sex with that robot? What's going on here?
But it's funny, and that's why he says it, Andrew, because that's who the Joker is. I love the jetpack. There's a few little Easter eggs and nuggets throughout the scene that I picked up on, and I will share them with you now. Whenever they fight in that miniature Gotham, whenever he powers it on, all the little buildings light up, some music plays, and they play the Joker's motif from the animated series. On the animated series, anytime the Joker shows up, they play a little tune that plays in the music of Gotham. So they work that in to the movie, which is really cool. There's also a giant, statue. There's tons of giant statues in this World's Fair, but one of them is essentially Mr. Freeze's suit. It's got the ribs at the knees and the shoulders and the joints. It's got the dome head. So they worked in a little reference to Mr. Freeze as well, which I thought was pretty fun.
Pretty cool.
It's a great pick, Andrew. I love you get the action climax, and you also get, like you said, Batman pleading to her, and he says, "Andy, what will vengeance solve?" Which is great, hearing Batman say that. It's almost pot calling the kettle black, but
I was gonna say, you hypocrite.
say he has obviously this code. His quest is about ridding. It's not personal. It's not ridding the killers of his parents. It's ridding evil incarnate and doing his part. And that code is what keeps him on the right side of the law. Keeps him sane, but Batman's not really a sane person. But it's the difference between him and Catwoman.
Who is?
Or him and Andy. Fair enough. Andrew, it's a good pick. I'm gonna go a different direction. I'm going to zoom in really far and go to one very small specific scene. I want to pick this because this movie, for being a essentially long episode of the TV show, it could have just been a side story with Batman and a new villain. And it is that, but they work in so much about the core of who Bruce Wayne Batman is. And it's not an origin story. We don't see his parents getting murdered, but it goes back to him making the vow. And honestly, real quick, I love that even in 1993, we are not holding the audience's hand, showing his parents get murdered again. It does not do this. And by the time you get to Batman versus Superman opens with that, and people are groaning, we know his parents get killed. We get it. We've seen it so many times. They don't do that here. They give you enough that if you were unfamiliar with Batman, you would get it. But they also just assume that everyone knows this by now. And this is 1993. And I appreciate that. So the scene I'm highlighting is whenever he's fallen in love with Andrea. He's going to ask her to marry him. But he realizes this is going to break his promise to his parents. He has vowed to rid the city of evil. and he's tormented for a while, and he chooses love. He chooses to be happy. And he goes to his parents' grave, and he is crying, breaking the news to them. Like, I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy. My God, that is heartbreaking, and that is just cuts to the core of who Batman is, this tragic character where he has foregone so much of his personal life and life of being a functioning human being, of having someone to love, all of that to a promise he made to dead people. And the thing about promises to someone who's dead is it can never change because the person is dead, and they can never give you permission to move on from it. So he holds that over himself. And here we have him like breaking that vow, and how hard it is for him. And it's just not the thing I would expect from this, little murder mystery with Batman. Them talking about like the core of this vow and who Batman is and the tragicness of the character. And they do it so well. They do it well throughout the animated series. I mean, one reason that series holds up the test of time is because it has its cake and eats it too with Batman. We've lamented a lot when I talk about live action Batman movies, how they tend to get darker and darker and darker and darker to the point where you get to this one shade of Batman. Like, he doesn't have to be this horribly dark, serious character. It's one version of him. But my God, he can be fun. He can be funny. He can be hopeful. He can be optimistic. And the animated series gets to do all of that. It shows you how you can have one character who's Batman who can do all of it. And this movie, in a microcosm, gets to do that too. He can be lighthearted. He can crack some jokes, but we can get to the tragicness of it as well. And it all plays. It all works. I'm impressed. And this movie has a runtime of like under 80 minutes, and they're able to cram so much into it. So the fact that they get to, again, the core of the character in that amount of time in the story, I think is very impressive. So yeah, that scene of him tearfully breaking his promise to his parents at their grave is my favorite scene of the movie.
I think this is a great pick. I think, like you said, and part of that's got to come from like just the efficiency of telling stories on the television show. I mean, you got 22, 23 minutes to tell your story, and there were multi-part episodes, but by and large, that means you get really efficient with your storytelling, being able to trim the fat and kind of get to the core of what you need to be doing. And you've got 3 times the runtime here, a little bit extra. But you're still being efficient with that. You're still making sure. And there is like a 3-act structure here for the most part. Basically, if you would split this up into 3 episodes of the television show, it probably would have been fine.
Yeah.
And it just goes really well. I remember there was a story Jeff Johns used to tell back when they were writing 52. 52 was this weekly comic that came out for a while from DC that had all these different stories happening in it. And it was written by Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison, and Greg Rucka all at once. All 4 of them had like 6 or 7 pages an issue, and they had to. And so Jeff Johns would talk about going to the editor and being like, "Hey, I need 6 pages for my Booster Gold story this month," and the editor would be like, "You have 4," and he'd be like, "Well, I really like 6 pages," and the editor would be like, "You have 4," and he'd be like, "Is there anything?" He'd be like, "You have 4 pages." Like the editor, like to his credit, would like not back down. He was like, "You have 4 pages. That's your story. That's what you have for that this month." Everything like that. So Jeff Johns would talk about how that required him to, really dial in. He's like, what is the information that needs to be given in this installment? And it would be like these things. And he'd be like, all right, if it's not about that, it's not helping that, trim it away, get it down to what needs to be done. And it's actually probably one of those things that's actually probably a really strong exercise. But I imagine working on the show and having to do that same thing had a similar effect here, that when they finally had a longer runtime, they were still able to pack so much in.
Yeah.
Because of those things that have been learned from doing the show. So, and it works. Like you said, there's hits on every level. Yeah. And it's one of those things where like, it'd be so easy for like someone to just be like, well, his parents aren't around. What does it matter? Like, matters to him because he made the promise. He knows what it means, and he knows what it means to not do that. And just like you said, the line of just like, I never expected to be happy. Just devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Speaking of the heavy lifting they have to do, I mean, they have to tell the story, introduce a new villain, introduce this character, get to the point where we believe that they got engaged at one point, that the love, I mean, it's doing so much. I made a note that they have such a strange meet cute. Batman is at his parents' grave, visiting it as he often does, and he overhears her talking, And he's like, I'm sorry, what were we saying? She's like, oh, I'm not talking to you. He's like, okay. And then she keeps talking. She's like, oh, yeah, that's just Bruce Wayne. And he comes back. He's like, okay, wait, I heard my name. And then it's revealed that she's talking to her mom's grave. So, like, they meet in a cemetery talking
What
to
a meet cute.
dead parents. Exactly. And he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. She's like, oh, that's okay. We're done. Mom doesn't have much to say anyway. It's like an oddly like dark joke. It's good though. I like that this character, Andrea, gives Bruce Wayne such crap. She comes like to visit him, and he's all bandaged up from a fight that he had as Batman. And she's like, "What happened to you? Did you trip over some loose cash? Like, what's happening in your life that you would actually, get hurt?" And then this kind of continues their meet cute because like he's doing jujitsu. She says Gesundheit, and then she's like, "I'm just playing. I know what that is." And then she flips him over. He takes her down like from the ground. Like he slings this woman to the ground. And then of course, gets her in a compromising position. They kiss. Alfred walks out and goes, "Oh," and then like turns back. Which he does twice in this movie.
My goodness.
Twice in this movie, he walks out, sees them making out, and goes, and then like leaves. It's a good little running bit. But it's good. You totally buy this relationship. You buy that he loves her so much that he would give up his mission. It's great. And almost like him willing to give it up and then her leaving because of her father forcing her to leave. Him losing that almost like sends him deeper into the mission. It's almost also part of his origin that like there was one time where he really thought he could have love and give it up and it was taken away from him. So like, well, now there's no holding back. Like this is my life as Batman. Almost strengthens it in that way, which is impressive.
I agree completely. There's a couple of Batman stories where they've tried to approach something kind of similar. Where they kind of try to do a story about like Batman finding happiness and moving on from Batman. There's always something that happens, and I don't always like it. This one handles it in a way that I actually find relatively satisfying because it's a situation where it's not just him that has to come up with some contrivance, or they don't like fridge the woman he's seeing. Like there's a story Kevin Smith did years ago.
I was just about to bring that up. Yep. Cacophony and the Widening Gyre.
Widening Gyre, yeah. Widening Gyre is the one specifically that causes the issue. And the thing is like, the twist in Widening Gyre, I was like, oh man. But like the fact that it came at the expense of his like love interest and everything, I was like, man, like, because I was like, cause Kevin Smith introduces that character Onomatopoeia, which it's a character that only works on the page really. But, but like, if there's a character in the movie that's going snap, like it's whatever, but it's a comic. It's what's supposed to be. So he does Batman versus Onomatopoeia in Cacophony, and then in Widening Gyre we get this new hero that's got these emotional moments, these emotional beats, and then it's revealed, lo and behold, like you talk about a guy like infiltrating Batman's circle just to get back at him. That's what Widening Gyre is, but I don't like the art very much, and then the fact that the twist comes at the expense of Silver St. Cloud, I was just like, oh man, like you were so close, like you were doing so well, and then they just had to go and kill Silver St. Cloud to now make it personal in the second half of the story that never came out.
Yes, I was going to say, and then he never follows it up. Classic Kevin Smith. Like,
classic Kevin Smith.
Doesn't go back to it. It's very frustrating. Yep. Kevin Smith in comics is very frustrating. There's always like glimpses of like, I really like this idea, but this other stuff you're doing is not working for me. We don't need to go off on that tangent.
I remember reading his Green Arrow when it came out, and I devoured it. Like I loved his Green Arrow when it came out
because
I went back and
he wanted
Kevin Smith writing Green Arrow. Like
it's so clear he just wanted to write Batman in his Green Arrow. Like Batman shows up as a supporting character and like takes over the book anytime Batman's on.
Yeah, and then he was gonna do a Batman. He was gonna do a Batman like Brave and the Bold team up book. That never happened. And then he finally came back and just did some Batman books and then never finished them. And they were drawn by Walt Flanagan, who just, it's fine, I guess, but like it just doesn't, the covers all looked way better than the actual book did.
Definitely.
But it was one of those things where, and he wrote, like there was some Spider-Man, he did a Daredevil book, and that was the thing that kind of got him on the map, and everyone was like, oh man. And then he did like a Spider-Man book that took like 10 years to come out. He did Green Arrow, which was like 50. He did 10 issues, and then I think he did like 3 or 4 more. and then he did some Batman stuff. So it's been very, very in between and limited, and that's also part of the problem. Is it just never? There's no consistency. So anyway, I don't like when they do that with the characters, where they find ways to eliminate them that almost always come at the expense of the character. And this one, they give the character in question her own tragic story and motivations that lead to this happening, and I think that makes it much more interesting.
Yeah, and she's alive at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good. It's good.
Do it again.
Speaking of being alive at the end, let's talk about that little epilogue. We talked about the action climax, your favorite scene in the movie, but after that, Batman thinks that she has perished in the explosion, but back in the Batcave, he's being very sad about it, of course, understandably. And Alfred, my favorite Alfred, is comforting him as a parent, basically, as someone who loves him, and says this great line, that vengeance blackens the soul. And he says he's amazed at Bruce's ability to walk that abyss every night without falling in. But Andrea fell into that a long time ago. Just beautiful stuff. Again, getting to the core of who Batman is, but also Alfred just being so loving and really giving a perspective to Batman. That's another thing that Alfred's always doing, is trying to reframe things. Have Batman not carry the guilt of everything. It's so good. And then he finds in the Batcave a locket that was obviously left by her before she left town, so he knows that she's still alive. At the very least, he knows she's alive. And then we see her on a ship leaving town. This guy tries to talk to her. She's clearly not interested. He says, "I'm sorry, do you want to be alone?" And she just says, "I am." And then it goes back to Batman standing on a rooftop. We know the symmetry here. We know that he's also alone and will carry this pain forever. Gosh darn it. What a tragic character, but so well told. This movie's pretty good, Andrew.
It's pretty good. I think that's a great sum up. I think this epilogue is perfect. I think it creates a real, like I said, it brings that home, that this is not just, another Batman romance where the romantic interest is just sidelined because we need Batman to stay being Batman. That's because that's what it always is. And people get I always hate when people get they're always well, how effective is Batman if Gotham still has criminals? And I'm like, please understand serial storytelling. Understand. First off and foremost, Batman's not real. There's not a real city he's cleaning up from crime. These are all just ciphers for stories. There is nothing, if Batman solves all the crime, Batman stories end. And that's just not how it works. Some people wish it did. They wish that things would give way to other things, and I get that, but it's not how it is. Like I said, these characters are almost 100 years old at this point. No one seems upset that the family in Family Circus is still the same age.
I'm upset, Andrew. I'm pissed off. The kid needs to grow up. I don't know.
No, you're not.
Family Circus.
You haven't thought about Family Circus your entire life until this moment.
I thought that was an interesting pull. You could have gone Peanuts. You could have gone Calvin and Hobbes. You pulled out Family Circus.
I don't know. I just remember I watched Zack and Miri yesterday, and there's a Family Circus joke in it, so it was on my mind. But
Marmaduke is 500 in dog years. What is going on?
What is happening? Sally Forth has been at that job forever. She has not been promoted. This is ridiculous. But anyway, but anyway, my point is, it's usually a very contrived reason to keep Bruce Wayne as Batman without removing him from the role. He can't be happy because he doesn't want to be Batman anymore, so let's just get rid of the love interest. And to be fair, the love interest in this story is gotten rid of, but in a way that makes it, one, more satisfying that he's staying Batman, but two, also just adds this tragic layer, because now Bruce has basically lost her twice. First, to these events with her father that he had no idea about, and now second, to a series of events that he can't fix. Basically, Batman cannot solve this problem. And so he's kind of got this, losing this woman twice to weigh on his shoulders. And then she also has that same trauma, basically. She gave it up, she had to give it up the first time. She didn't want to, but she had to. And the second time, she's leaving it behind because she can't get over the things that she's dealing with. And therapy would potentially, there's a lot that could be unpacked here that could potentially solve these issues, but that's a whole different conversation. But
Yes.
by making it on both parts, keeping them apart, I think that makes it way more interesting. It's a much more, I wouldn't say satisfying ending necessarily, but a much more compelling ending than just Andrea got blown up in the explosion at Gotham World's Fair or whatever. Like, just far more satisfying.
I agree. We talked about the influences, quote unquote, of Batman Year 2 on this story, but there's also a sequence that is very reminiscent of Batman Year 1. So there's this big manhunt for Batman, and they almost catch him after an encounter with the Phantasm on a rooftop. Police helicopter shows up. Helicopter, because that is much more efficient than a blimp. Makes no sense for cops to use a blimp. And they start tracking him, and they track him across the rooftops and eventually into this construction site. And this is where it gets very Batman Year 1, because he's like cornered. You have the SWAT team moving out, who I love this. They did this in like, I think the very first episode of the anime series on Leather Wings. The SWAT team comes out of a van and they all go hut 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 hut. I love the idea that they out loud have to say hut 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 hut. It's so corny, but I love it so much. So he's cornered in this construction site, and he has to get away with the SWAT team coming down on him. He does this clever thing where he
just Blues Brothers there at that point.
He uses a grapple hook to shoot what they think is Batman emerging from the building, but it's just his cowl and cape. And they try to murder this man. They shoot the hell out. They shoot that thing to shreds. Like, if that was actually him, he would be dead in the streets. He uses that distraction to narrowly get away, and eventually Andrea, who happens to be nearby, picks him up and takes him away. That's another thing. There's very little clues about the true nature of the Phantasm. I mean, if you're in tune with kind of how these stories work, the fact that a new character shows up and a mysterious villain, you can probably guess that she's going to be the Phantasm. I'm trying to think back to the first time I watched this. I don't know if I figured it out or not. But there's a great line that I did not notice until this one, where she's being hit on by that slime ball, Arthur Reeves, and they have dinner together. They go back to her place. They're at the door. He's like, you shouldn't go to bed right away on a full stomach. Maybe I can come inside. We can kill some time. And she says, "Oh, I have a killer day tomorrow." She's got to kill somebody tomorrow. And also the fact that, like I said, there's a encounter with Batman and the Phantasm, and then Andrea shows up to save Bruce Wayne at the end of that little clue. Like, how do they get there? Because it's the same person.
Joker figures it out. Why couldn't you?
Joker's a smart man, Andrew. I don't know. So this movie doesn't give an origin to Joker per se. We don't have a chemical bath or anything, but it's one of the very few times in Batman media, it's getting more and more common, but still relatively few, where we see like a pre-disfigured Joker. Killing Joke being the most famous / infamous, but typically most people prefer to have essentially no origin for Joker. He's just Agent of Chaos. He's just a figure. He's just a menace. He's just Joker. But here we see his life as a pointy-nosed mobster. I think I like it. I think I agree. Like, a Joker's best is just Joker, but kind of seeing that he was a slime ball before his accident, and maybe the accident just added a little bit of mania to his psyche. It works. It tracks for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that departed from like Batman 89. Like, it's really it's in the same ballpark basically. Goat Joker was a thug before he was Joker, and the chemical bath, is not necessarily changing drastically who he is, as much as kind of just putting a lot more emphasis on the bad parts. Joker in Batman 89 goes from being a mob thug to basically just being a mob boss. And in this one, he goes from being a mob thug to essentially being a crazy psychopath, which you could argue he was already if he was a thug for the mob. But yeah, so it's in that same ballpark. And I guess, like you said, if you squint closely, you could line them up together, but it doesn't work because in Batman 89, he knows who Joker is. So it doesn't really work that way.
Right.
Why'd you say that, Andrew? It doesn't work at all. But anyway, I think it's fine. I don't really have it. Like, I'm not one of those people who's like, because like Killing Joke is so weird because like the whole point of Killing Joke is he's an unreliable narrator. Like, it's kind of the point. And so it's always odd when it's presented as like the definitive Joker origin when like the story never presents it as that.
I think
not really.
There's the line in the Killing Joke where he says, "If I'm going to have an origin, I prefer it to be multiple choice." Is that from the Killing Joke?
Yeah, it might be Killing Joke. I don't
think
remember,
so.
But I like that take way better. Like the Joker is not somebody that, I know there's this stance that we need to, eventually all the stories get told, but I don't know that one ever needs to be told. Like, we know he fell in the chemicals. That's fine. Yeah. I don't need to know who he was before that. I think it's pretty immaterial.
Joker has
like, what is genuinely gained from knowing who he was before the chemical accident? I don't think you gain much. Unless you're trying to do, like, a story where you're just like, oh, shock.
Yeah,
Joker
or you're trying to, like,
add... someone important.
Or you're trying to make Joker a sympathetic character, which is a horrible idea and should never be done. Yeah, I said it. Joker has this genius line that I literally had to Google to understand how genius it is. Andrew, whenever old Wheezy shows up at Joker's hideout, Joker's welcoming him, and he says, "Mi casa nostra es su casa nostra." Now, I know mi casa es su casa. My house is your house. I know that. But he doesn't say casa. He says casa nostra, which is a phrase I wasn't familiar with. Andrew, have you ever heard Casa Nostra?
I have heard Nostra before.
Specifically, I think it's Caso Nostra is how it's spelled. It is slang for the mob. It means the mob. It has an Italian translation. I think it's like our stuff or something like that. But the term is used to refer to the familial mob, specifically in the U.S.
That's clever.
Yeah. My house, your house, but also the mobsters. My mob. It's very good. It's a very good line.
10 out of 10.
Another great line, and then that goes back to like cutting to the core of who Batman is and stuff. Batman, he calls Andrea out about her father because she claims she doesn't know where he is. He's like, "That's not true. You said you were close with him now. Told somebody else that." And he's like, "Why are you protecting him?" And Andrea says, "The way I see it, the only person in this room still controlled by their parents is you." Oof. Mic drop. Oof.
Boom.
He's got nothing to say about it. He got no comment.
Yeah, you have no response to that, my dude.
That was good.
None.
That was good. Andrew, I'll say it again. This is a pretty good movie. Going back to its reception, it made no money. I don't think it's really indicative of the quality of the film, but for one, people didn't know it existed. Marketing was almost non-existent. I don't know that Christmas Day is the right release date. Maybe if you got the marketing there, but still, like, I get it. It's a family movie, but I think it plays much better maybe like summer when kids are out of school and need something to do.
Or like spring break weeks at least.
Yeah, something. I get that kids aren't in school at Christmas, but this doesn't have like a Christmas feel to it.
No, not at all. There's not even any snow. Yeah, like, and that's largely what's seen as the reason why it failed, is it was an 11th hour decision to move it to a theatrical release. I don't know if they had an opening and thought, hey, we throw out a $6 million movie, we'll make some money real easy. The show was really successful, but for whatever reason, it did not come to pass. And was the only theatrical Batman movie fully animated to be given a full theatrical release until Lego Batman.
It's pretty crazy, isn't it?
25 years later. 24.
Man, Lego Batman is really good, Andrew.
Yes.
That sometimes people say Lego Batman is the best Batman movie, and it's a little jokey, but only a little. I don't know. I would have a hard time ranking some Batman movies. Maybe we'll get to it one day, but anyway, Mask of the Phantasm. It's great. Deserving of its legacy. I'll say it.
I agree.
Andrew, I gotta say, I'm looking forward to this month. The quality is probably a little bit higher than our typical month of movies, for one. But these are just a lot of movies that I'm just really excited to revisit. Because I think I said it last week, like, even though we're acknowledging these movies have a great legacy, they didn't all click with me. So I'm excited to revisit them and really look, with this hashtag PP mindset, see what I find, see if it elevates them a little bit. Even this movie, Mask of the Phantasm, wasn't my favorite Batman animated movie, but I really found a lot to like on this revisit.
Me as well. It's really well done. That's honestly just first and foremost, it is just so well done. And yeah, I'm excited to go back. I mean, I'm a big fan of most of what we're talking about this month, so it is interesting. It will be interesting to watch, like in the case of something like, say, have we announced what the movies are yet?
I think we said them last week, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously something like Blade Runner is going to be interesting just because I haven't watched the theatrical of Blade Runner in a really long time. I've watched various other versions, so I'm interested to go back and look at that version and be like, hey, maybe I get it. But yeah, it'll be an interesting month for sure.
Blade Runner coming later this month. Next week, we'll be talking about The Thing, the original film that's called The Thing, not the original adaptation of that story, and not the prequel that was also called The Thing. So, you know which one we're talking about. We're talking about that next week. But for now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave a question for a future episode of our podcast, you can. Just hop into our Discord. There's a link to our server in the show notes. Discord is free. It's just an app you can use to hang out with different communities like ours, talk about all kinds of nerdy stuff, hang out, and leave questions like I just said. This week, the question comes from Mike Lynch, who says, what movie has your favorite sound design? For my money, it's Jurassic Park. Even the sounds of the door handle is iconic. Mike, you've clearly put some thought into this. I love this question.
Mike, gonna be honest with you, Mike. I have not. So
I can't say this. I've dialed in this specifically, but I can appreciate a movie you've seen so many times that you know the sound effects, and they become iconic. Obviously, I'm guessing you've seen Jurassic Park a lot, Mike. I cannot conjure up the sound of the door handle off the top of my head, but I can believe that they are iconic for you. Andrew, mutual friend Doug talks about the sound of Indiana Jones' punch all the time. He says that's the greatest punch in cinema. That is something that is obviously iconic for him. But I don't, at the top of my head, nothing springs to mind immediately as my personal favorite. But there are some iconic sounds that I can think of. I mean, this might be like objectively the greatest sound design in film. Star Wars. I mean, think about everyone can hear that the crackle of a
lightsaber sound,
the sound as you slash
ship
it,
sounds, the
blasters,
sounds.
yeah,
the blasters. The use of the Wilhelm scream. But
yes.
you know. We got to figure out the movie that's from, because if we're talking about iconic sound design, that one certainly lived on forever. But
sure,
it's Star Wars. I think is like probably the first thing I think of, just simply because of how iconic those sounds all became. So obviously that's a big thing. I'm trying to think of movies where like genuinely the way the sound all works is impressive to me, like the way the movie is audibly presented. Because that is a whole different thing at the end of the day, I think. And man, nothing's coming to mind. But it is it's an interesting question that I just don't think about very often. Like there's movies I know I've watched. Like there's movies obviously that I love the soundtrack for. But I don't really know that I consider that sound design in the classic sense of the term. But
I love moments I love when sound design is used as a tool. Like, obviously, there's sound in movies because we got to hear what's going on, and it's part of the story. But like, you think of like any time in a movie when someone puts a record on, and you get a close up of the needle, and it drops, and you hear the fuzz, and it like it's sound that's not just naturally picked up by a microphone, but we're zooming in and we are taking you into this moment by zooming into the sound design. It's such a effective way to do that.
Like, you think about guns in movies. Like, guns in movies are another thing that, like, the way a gun actually sounds in real life is nothing like what a gun sounds like in a movie. So you think of, like, even a movie like Heat, which is probably got really great sound design at the end of the day. Like, there's gunfights that are endlessly, like, these loud, ballistic sounds that are echoing back and forth. And, like, a real shootout is just a lot of pops.
Yeah.
Like, it's not near, like, not that I'm suggesting you go seek out an actual gunfight. But, like, if you actually, like, listen to guns firing, it's a fairly mundane sound.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's definitely gotten named. Talking about punches, like, the way a punch works is, like, an actual punch to someone's face, not super impressive sounding. But Indiana Jones, he's hitting that dude with a rock in his hand every single time, no question. And it makes it feel that much more epic and, larger than life.
It's wild. You talk about, like, a lot of times, especially on our modern internet, people get real bogged down with, like, realism in movies, and their criticism is like, that's not how that looks in real life. That's not how people act in real life. That's not how that sounds in real life. Like, that is not, I'm sorry, this is not #baby. That is not valid criticism of a movie. I'm sorry. I don't mean to say someone's opinion is invalid. I guess I'll take that back. But I just don't put much stock in that. Like, there is a visual language to movies, but that also applies to sound. Just talking about punches, I go back to Fight Club. I remember learning that, obviously they knew the sound of a punch would be so important in that movie. And they went through so many different ways to get the sound. It ends up being a mixture of things, but I do know I think they put walnuts inside of a dead chicken, of course, store chicken. So the walnuts, and then punch that. They hit that to get that crunch sound. And, like, that makes no sense if you're trying to get a realistic punch sound. You would just record a UFC fight and get the sound there, right? But that is not satisfying. That doesn't enhance the story, which is what you're doing with the movie. It's one of those things that's very easy to take for granted. The sound design in a film, like, so much of what you hear in a movie is not captured live as they're recording it. It's added later. It's created by sound designers. So very often unsung heroes of movies.
Yeah, they really are. It's something where, you could easily take something that's very memorable. Like, that lightsaber sound is iconic. And I'm not saying that if you make the lightsaber sound not iconic, the movie's not successful and doesn't become this big thing. But, like, that's like Ghostbusters, I think, is another one where if I'm looking at sound design and all the different facets of sound design, because you've got the proton pack sounds, you've got the PKE meter sounds, you've got, like, the sound when they're doing the proton stream, stuff like that. All of that had to come up with, and all of that is so iconic. Like, the siren the Ecto-1 has is not a siren that any other car has had ever. Like, it doesn't sound like anything else. It's very specific to that. So you're creating these individual iconic sounds that are still now, like, people know what the proton pack's turning on sounds like. It's a very specific sound. And then you mix in, like, creature effects and things like that with the snarls and stuff from the terror dogs and everything, and you've got a movie that's going pretty far and creating a very unique audio experience to make sure that the things you're hearing are not things you've heard before. And
yeah,
I mean, we have a lot of stuff coming up.
With sci-fi, like you said, things that don't actually exist. So Star Wars, great example. There's not actually lightsaber sounds because they don't exist. Going back to Jurassic Park, the roar of a T-Rex, we can't go out and record that. And that one, I believe, is, again, a mixture of things. I think there's a lion roar in there. I think there's an airplane. It is a mixture of
things, for sure.
I think there's an airplane engine in there. Godzilla's roar, which is iconic, is not a sound that can be made by any person. Again, mutual friend, Doug, I believe he once told me that it was like a rubber glove on what instrument? It's on some kind of bass instrument running down it. But and it creates these iconic sounds because they only exist. They're specifically designed for this moment on screen, and they become iconic because you associate that sound with this very specific thing. Things you talk about guns, like the sound of a gun firing doesn't sound, the sound of movies, not the sound of real life, but also you think of like, I can hear someone on film unholster a gun and point it at somebody. Something that would be near silent probably in real life. You can hear the whip of it sliding out the leather. And then like guns always make these clacking sounds when they just point it at somebody as if like metal parts are shifting, which they are not on an actual gun. But this, people like pointing guns at each other. It's not really making a sound, but like you enhance it with the design. So
like you think of like the Power Rangers movie. We watched that, but like every motion they make is just like literally they point their arm up to point at something and it goes, look over there. And then they run away. And it's like, oh my God. Something like Star Trek probably also very much falls into this. The sound of the doors opening, just that. And then the things like that. Like we take all of it for granted, not realizing that these sounds at one point didn't exist. Somebody had to put them together. And it's pretty wild to think about the wealth of things that we have just taken for granted that are just hundreds of hours of someone's manpower. Capitalism, everyone.
I'm going to lock in Star Wars as my favorite sound design in movies. I think it's a pretty safe bet, but there's just nothing comes.
Yeah.
I'm not even, I don't know. We went through the whole debate of being a big Star Wars fan back in our Star Wars episode. Oh yeah, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm going to lock that in as my favorite, but I would love to hear other examples. I mean, if there's a specific movie where you think up top to bottom, the sound design is your favorite in film, I definitely want to hear about it.
I'm locking in one last pick, and I'm going to go with WALL-E.
Oh, that's good.
Finally.
Animated films. I mean, you're really not capturing sound on set, right? Because they're not filmed. So all of that is, God, that's a good pick. Because half that movie is
silent. There's no dialogue.
Right. That's what I was trying to say. It's not a silent film, but there's no dialogue. Yeah, God, that's a good pick. Good one. I want to hear some other examples. Let us know. Hit us up on social media. Jump into that Discord. What is your favorite sound design in film? And join us next week when we are talking about The Thing. And until then, just remember that, hey, maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.